Thank you guys for being here. I'm excited to get started. We only have 1 hour, so I'm going to jump right in. This is like, to me, my whole mind has been blown by what AI can do. And so we are excited to share what we've seen so far. It's obviously not perfect. It makes mistakes, and we're going to try to spend this time letting you know some of the practical things we've discovered in terms of using it. Obviously, super rapidly evolving environment. So we're going to focus today on ChatGPT Plus, a tiny bit about Claude AI, which is another alternative to ChatGPT, but we'll have more of these sessions coming in the future. So keep an eye out. We'll mention at the end of the session how you guys can stay in the loop on our subsequent sessions, but there's lots more coming down the line. This is really just the beginning. So let's jump in. Let's go to the next slide. And so just quickly, I think I see lots of familiar faces. It's super fun to see you guys here. But for anybody that I don't already know, I am Katie Pfeiffer. I lead Recalc with Suzanne Corley, who's also on the call here. And at Recalc, our mission is to make it easy to learn the technical skills you need to succeed in your career. We are super focused on spreadsheet training, finance training, private equity training. And with everything happening in AI, we're being as focused as we can be on AI transformation around all of those things as well. We also do PowerPoint training and SQL training in addition to the spreadsheet and finance stuff. So everything we do pretty much is live over Zoom. We try to keep it as interactive as possible. We occasionally do in-person stuff as well. The goal is for you to be able to ask questions and learn in a really efficient way. So that's what we're all about. Let's go to the next slide. In terms of who we are, so my background, I started off my career at Audax Group, which is a middle market private equity firm based in Boston and San Francisco. And I also worked at a family investment office after that, and have held a few operating roles in what were our portfolio companies, so mostly finance roles in growing tech and construction companies. And then Suzanne, who joins me on the call here today, and we'll sort of tag team the conversation. She also has a finance-oriented background, spent 5 years at JP Morgan investment banking, and then has had various brand leadership roles. So our goal in all the training that we do is to bring a mix of finance investing background as well as practical building a company background to all the teaching that we do, and we love to teach. So excited to be here and jump into the AI conversation. So let's keep going. And we didn't think of polling all of you from the beginning of the signups, but about halfway through the signups, we added a couple of key questions. So I was just curious, like, who has what today? So do you have ChatGPT Plus? That's the paid $20 a month version. Most of you actually do not, although I suspect after today, many of you maybe will. So some of you do already have it, but 70% do not. And then how often do you use ChatGPT? So this is kind of paid or not paid. A bunch of you use it all the time. Some of you just started, aren't sure how to use it necessarily, and some are not really using it yet. So this is a super exciting moment in time where people are just figuring out these tools. And nobody yet has chat on this call anyways that answered the survey has ChatGPT Enterprise, which is a super important observation, because the main limitation on some of these tools today is really privacy oriented. So they can do a lot, but if you just dump lots of sensitive data, that's probably a really bad idea. So a lot of what we do, I will caveat that, like, while it can do very cool things, you shouldn't put any sensitive data into the regular tools, whether that's, even if that's the paid ChatGPT Plus, because that can be used not only to train the model, but it could kind of pop back out on the other end of somebody else's query, and that would not be a good thing. But there's a lot of enterprise tools coming down the line. So ChatGPT Enterprise, I think they're scaling up their sales team. I expect a lot of folks will have it. A number of you said you think your organization will have it soon. Microsoft Copilot just more broadly released this week. As of Wednesday, they rolled out to, or firms have the opportunity to buy if they're buying more than 300 seats or 300 or more seats. And then there's a bunch of other enterprise tools that are in many cases more use case specific that are coming out. Some people are setting up their own environments on Azure and other tooling. So there's a lot happening here in the enterprise. And, you know, your ability to use this with sensitive data will, of course, depend on your enterprise environment. So let's go to the next piece. So ChatGPT Plus. So this is the $20 a month version. That's what we're going to be talking about today. There's a lot of functionality in there that is not in 3.5, which is the free version. And we're going to be showing you how to use these different things. I would frame all of this as exploratory. It's AI. It doesn't always respond the same way. it may have stage fright today and not really do what it did 5 minutes ago when we were doing our run of show. That's all part of the fun of AI. So that is my number one caveat. And then the other piece is, of course, we are not encouraging you or telling you to put any sensitive data in there. Do not put sensitive data in there. And we are not taking any liability for your future use on AI, as you might expect. Also, none of this is investing advice. With that out of the way, let's jump in. So I'm going to jump over to ChatGPT itself. So the rest of what we're going to show you is going to be live in the system. If it stops working for any reason, we're going to show you some pre-recordings of what we've done. So let's stop sharing this and I'll share my screen. So with ChatGPT Plus, the first thing is going to be getting it set up how you want. So what do we need to know? So if you buy the $20 a month version, you will end up being able to see at the top of your screen 3.5 and 4. So 4 is where I think a lot of the magic happens. So 4 is their more advanced model. You are capped, by the way. You can't just like fire away a million messages. I haven't found a huge problem with this, but more than 50 messages every 3 hours, you'll get bumped down basically to 3.5. But there's a bunch of different models in here. So the first question is, what are these different things and how do we get them to show up? So if the one of the biggest things, we are focused on data analysis generally as a company. And so that's what today is focused on. One of the most exciting things is this model that's what's called advanced data analysis. It used to be called code interpreter, if you're familiar with that. The concept, the like magic unlock here is LLMs, large language models, which is what all of these models are not, they are next word predictors, okay? So they just predict the next word like really well. And that means out of the box, they're not necessarily great at calculation, okay? Because they can hallucinate calculation. If you're like 2 + 2, like they probably should predict 4, but it's not like deterministic in the way that we are used to. But what they are really good at is writing and therefore writing code. And so the huge unlock with advanced data analysis is basically you ask it a question, it writes code to come up with an answer and it executes that code. And you'll see it's like all in the browser. And so that gives a much, much better result for actual data-oriented work than any default model will give. And so the question, practically speaking, is how do we turn that on? If you have the paid version, you go to set, you go to click the little three dots on the lower left, you click settings, you go to beta features and you turn it on. While you're here, you may also want to consider turning on plugins because that gives you access to all the third-party plugins that are, you know, available under ChatGPT. I have not yet found that there's too many that are super robust and useful. A lot of them are kind of like, they advertise doing more than they really do today, but that's an environment and a third-party ecosystem of apps that will continue to evolve quickly, I'm sure. So that's how we turn on advanced data analysis. And a lot of what we talk about today is going to be like, what model do we use for what? And honestly, it's a continuous experimentation. Like you just have to try. There's certain things like if you want to upload an Excel file, you need to use advanced data analysis. You cannot upload a file, an Excel file to like the default. But there's other things that are not as obvious. Like maybe if we're trying to summarize a model, would it be better to give it the model in Excel as a PDF or as an image? You want to play around with different things and you'll get different results. So let's try this out. And feel free, by the way, to drop questions in the chat while we're talking. So let's say that I upload a file. So I am in, by the way, like select the right model you want to use. I have selected advanced data analysis because I want to do some Excel stuff. I have an Excel file. This is just like an order database. And my concern here, I'm concerned that the names in this database for my customers are inconsistent. So like I have Honeywell, Honeywell Inc., Google, like I need to do some relabeling in this data set. So I'm just going to upload the data and it'll say, okay, cool, you've uploaded the file. How can we assist you? And it's just a conversation and don't hesitate because you don't know how to write the right prompt. It's a conversation, just chat with it. So it's going to upload the file first here or like, and ingest the data. I will say like, if you try to give it data that does not have extra columns and rows on like the left and the top, it will do a better job ingesting it the first time. If your data is randomly in the middle of your sheet, it'll struggle with that at first, but it will do it. But it's just like easier if you have like kind of upper left data. So it's reviewed our data and it's seen, okay, we've got Google, Google Alphabet, Honeywell, Honeywell Inc., LA School District, LA Schools. I have not told it anything about that. It just figured that out. And so now it wants to know, like, what do we want to do? And what I'd like to do is standardize or relabel the names. I'd also like to make I happen to know Facebook is in this data set. I don't want to call it Meta going forward. Oh, and here we go. Some stage fright. Let's try again. So now it's going to relabel our data. Come on, that was worse. Regenerate. Sometimes what I would say is you have to open another chat again. Like sometimes these chats get like kind of, I don't know, off in some way. And I find like if you just start again, it's better. And you can always start a new chat on the upper left just by clicking new chat. So should we consolidate? Yes, let's do it. And so my observation is that you can give it data, it'll come up, at a minimum, it's valuable, it'll come up with your issues. And then my goal is for it to map all of this going forward. What are we going to call all of these things? Create a key for us and possibly even relabel, like put that back into our data set. So that's what's happening now. And there's a question of whether failed commands count towards your 50. Probably. I haven't had a huge issue with the 50. Like, honestly, the amount of time like the downside of AI is it like takes some time to work with it. You get a little bit faster over time in terms of working with it. But it takes enough time and enough experimentation. And I have not been hitting a limit, generally speaking. Although I say that, I probably am going to like jinx myself on this call. And then there's a really important question in the chat. If you've uploaded this data set, is it now publicly accessible? And the short answer is assume yes. So don't upload sensitive data. And that is like the huge issue. What enterprises are doing is they're trying to get their hands on an enterprise version of this, like ChatGPT Enterprise, where what is like, it'll be tenantized, so your data is not going back out there. All right. We've got, what have we gotten? So I asked it, there's a little bit of an art, or like you'll continue to learn how to get better at prompting. Don't let that hold you back. Just do your best and then ask for more as you go. It's a conversation. But what I've prompted it here is, can you please show table mapping the original names to the standardized names? Put the original names. The more specific you are, the better. But I've also found shorter prompts. More short prompts is better than writing some huge prompt where you ask it for like 10 things. It'll do some of them. It'll get confused on others. It's just not as good of a result. Short, to the point, specific, put the original names on the left. And I didn't just magically think of putting the original names on the left. I assumed that. But then one time when I was running this, it didn't do it. So then I was like, cool, I'm going to just do this going forward. And by the way, if there's activities you do a lot, just drop them in a doc so you don't have to constantly rewrite your prompts. You can just paste them, which is what I'm doing from this. So here we have the mapping. Facebook is mapped to Meta, Google's mapped to Google, Google Alphabet's mapped to Google, and so on. Like, this is crazy in my mind. Like, this is better. Like I didn't have to do anything, and this is correct. So I don't know. I think it's kind of magic. Now, what I want to do from here is I want to get this back into my data set, and I want it to add a column to my original data with these new names. So that's what I'm going to ask it for. I'm going to say, can you please create an Excel file that it contains the original data? And I'm trying to remind it, like, don't change my original data. In the earlier steps, it sometimes is so eager to relabel your data that it'll just go through your original data and change it. So if you want both, you may have to be specific. And if it doesn't do that, you could say, okay, please re-upload the data and then put it back there. Like, again, it's just a conversation. You can get it to do it, but I guess in some ways the good news is there's still some value to having a human brain for the moment, which is like checking its work, making sure it hasn't made mistakes. So I'm going to download this, and I'm going to just flip my screen share over for a second so we can see what it did, which you guys are going to see real time with me. I don't know what it did yet. And hopefully I also asked it to put another tab like with the actual key. So let's see what it did. So it did what I did not want it to do, which it does like I've found 50% of the time. So what it did here, and it helps to know your data, which this is a file we teach all the time in our intermediate Excel class, so I do know it. So it gave me the standardized names. These are actually correct. However, what it did here was it changed the customer names of my original data set. Now, that's not the end of the world. It's actually fine, but I would like to still have the original names. So what I should go back now and do is say, it looks like you overwrote the original names. Could you go back and not change the original data, and it will re-upload and so on. Yeah, I do have, the good news is I do have the name mapping of the original names and so on. So it's like, it's AI, it kind of gets it right. It doesn't get it perfect. You still have to think and experiment with it. And sometimes it will get it right. So it's not super 100% consistent. But I'll just say, it looks like you overwrote the original data. Can you please try again? And then there's a question, do you need to go step by step, or could you have done one detailed longer prompt? I have found step by step is better, but it just depends on, I'm sure that will continue to evolve. So let's try again. I'm going to stop my share, grab this new Excel file. It's kind of funny, as it gives you new files, it'll actually say, it'll name the file like corrected or version 2, version 3. It's kind of funny. So this looks better. Let's see if I can get my screen share to work. So this is our corrected file, and this is actually correct. So this is mapping Facebook to Meta. And let's see. We can see Honeywell Inc. has been mapped to Honeywell and so on. And then we see the mapping here. I could further ask it, hey, if I would like to replace this with a formula, how would I write that formula? It'll tell me to write an XLOOKUP. I'm going to skip that step because we have a lot of things we want to show today, and all of these steps take some time. But you could use it to help you then make this a more dynamic file. Because what's not dynamic here is if I change any of these names, nothing will change here because it's all just hard-coded outputs. One of the cool things is if this file had a bunch of analysis with formulas, it will give you back, or at least has the capacity to give you back, and most of the time will give you back that file with all your formulas preserved. So a huge limitation is it won't write its own formulas into your Excel file, but it will tell you what formulas you could write. So that's good. And then it will preserve all the stuff, all the analysis you do have. So if you had lots of other stuff going on in this file, that will still be working. Make sense? Let's see if we can get it to analyze the data or summarize the data. So my next move is, we have a bunch of customer data. I want to summarize it by customer. So it's giving me a summary by customer. And it's telling me about how this is formatted. The reason for that, which I didn't mention at the beginning but should have, is you have this kind of interesting thing, which we're still in the early days of playing around with, called custom instructions on the left. Custom instructions is basically if you always want ChatGPT to know a few things, you don't want to constantly remind it, you can tell it, I have some stuff around the Recalc brand voice, and I have some stuff around how I want ChatGPT to respond. I got tired of always saying years across the top. ChatGPT has a tendency to put years down the left, and it annoys me. So I just say years across the top. When you're putting data in Excel, use accounting style number formatting, no $sign, include a total row, make it bold. It does not always follow these instructions, but at least I'm not constantly retyping them. I still haven't decided if it's actually better to have it in here, or it's better to have it in a doc that I can just copy paste in as needed, because it kind of gets distracted by this sometimes. It's telling me about accounting style formatting now, and I'm not exporting this to Excel yet, but whatever, it's trying. Now, it summarized this. My advice on that, anytime you have it summarize, is have it check the totals. So I don't, just like I wouldn't believe an analyst's work if they didn't put a check in their work, I don't believe ChatGPT if they don't put it, if it doesn't check its work. And you have to prompt it to check and like tell it how to check. Problem with the live demo is that anything can happen. This is like 10 more fails than like I've had all morning, but you know, that's life. So let's see if it can do it. So it's telling me yes. And by the way, I do know, I happen to know this data, this is the total. So what I would recommend rather than just believing that's the total is I would go to your data and sum it up. That takes 2 seconds and make sure that it is the same as the total is what it's calculating here. By the way, if you're curious, when it says show work here, this is the code that it's writing. It's basically executing Python code to do all of your work. It's writing the Python code. It's interpreting your question, writing Python code, writing that. I don't look at it like most of the time, but you could, and especially if you're into writing code and stuff, you could see what it's doing. So would we like this to be exported to Excel? I would soon, but let's first see if it can do a few other things. I want to know quantity and number of orders. So this is an iterative process. You keep asking it for more of what you want. And again, I think this is kind of magic. It's like we spend a lot of time in our spreadsheet fundamentals classes teaching people how to have the skill set to do this for themselves, whether through a pivot table or through a unique and a sum ifs and blocking cells. And I 1000% it's believable or it's doable for everyone to learn that, but it does take a real investment of time. And if you're just like, I'm preparing for a customer meeting that I have in like half an hour and I like need to see the summary of what we did with them. Again, don't dump your sensitive data into this, but when you get enterprise, like this is amazing. I think it's crazy. So, I happen to know these totals are all correct. And then it's also checking the totals. I think totals are bolded because I've asked it to do that. And then would we like this to be exported to Excel? Sure. Let's export to Excel. I'll just remind it of the style of formatting that I want. And then it will create me an Excel of this. I also could ask it to put it back in the Excel with the original data, which I didn't do here, but I definitely could. And let's check the chat on what kind of interesting questions we're getting. So to be clear, this is ChatGPT Plus, the paid version. What else do we have? If I see a question on if there's many tabs, do you have to specify? It's faster if you specify, but otherwise it will tell you what the tabs are and ask you what to analyze. And I think the question of would this violate most NDAs? I would expect so if you just dumped it into the general version, yeah. But I think most companies are going to set up some kind of enterprise environment where you can use it and it's kind of within the 4 walls of your enterprise. Okay, so we can download this. Let's see what it gave us. I should have just given that table in Excel. Again, I probably could have and should have asked it to put it back in the same file with the original data, which I didn't do. And again, it did not get it completely perfect, which is annoying, but such is life. It sometimes gets confused, and I think this is mostly because of my custom instructions, which I'm probably going to change, but it bolded this row instead of this. I probably should have specified I want the total at the bottom, not the top, but it's given me the data. It's just not exactly the format I want. And we could confirm that this, in fact, this is actually behaving like text. So one trick, if it often gives you data that's numbers. Like here, these are actually outputted as numbers. So this is 77, this is correct. It gave me text, which is a little bit annoying. As just a trick in Excel or Sheets, you can just say, what is the value of this? And it will force it to behave like a number. And then you could sum this up and say, okay, does this look right? And it does. So that's a trick if it gives you text. But you could also ask it not to do that. Okay, so we've seen a little bit of a taste of basic summary of cleaning up data, basic summaries. And now I want to try, and this is a live demo, so it should be fun, try to do one more thing, which is a cohort. And in fact, I'm actually going to just start a new chat for this. So we'll start a new chat, just click new chat. And I'm going to give it this is just a file of order data. All this is made up data, but it's the data we usually teach with. And I would like to have it build me a cohort analysis. So for those of you that are familiar, cohort analysis means let's group customers by when they first purchased from us and look at how those buckets of customers behave over time. So this is what I would call like a more sophisticated analysis. We'll see if it decides to behave in a live environment. But I would like to ask it for my revenue by cohort by month. So I want revenue in the table. I want cohort. I haven't even had to be that specific. I want cohort down the left-hand side and time across the top. The nice thing is it does tell me what it's planning to do. So it's saying, okay, I want to load the data. I want to group the customers based on their first purchase date and so on. So it's going ahead and doing that. And this is something where, oh, come on. Something where is a fairly like intermediate to advanced skill to actually be able to do yourself. Although we do teach it in our intermediate Excel and in all of our private equity training. So let's see how it does. And again, I found on all this stuff, it is not 100% consistent. So you do have to have some persistence and like ask it to try again and you try, and check what it does and so on. But we have definitely seen it do a successful cohort revenue, customer count, etc. So here, I'm actually going to kill the accounting style thing. I think that's just being annoying. And then I see a question in the chat. Is it good to paste the same prompts in GPT, Bard, and Claude and compare answers and yes, I would definitely say that is a good idea, but they each have their own limitations. So I would say that like Claude, for example, you can't upload Excel yet anyways. So this is like the option basically if you want to upload Excel. However, Microsoft Copilot, you can do a lot of this natively in Excel. Is my understanding. I don't have access to it yet. So here, let me share my screen. So it did the cohort analysis for us. Got cohorts down the left, time across the top. This generally looks correct. It has not built a total column and checked its work. That's what I would ask it to do next. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over that, but my next step would be ask it to do that, ask it to do the same thing on a customer count basis. This is crazy to me. Like based on very limited instructions, it knew to tag the customers based on when they first purchased and aggregate them accordingly. And like, this is a much more sophisticated analysis than anything we saw before. So I think that's pretty awesome. And then again, I would go through and say, please check your work and so on and so forth. I saw a question around what if it's a big data set? So it'll work on a big data set. In fact, because it's basically running code, like it's essentially running code, like in a big data set, I would say like a SQL oriented approach would be better than an Excel oriented approach often. And so I'd say you have two choices. You could either have it do the analysis like we're doing, or you could say, hey, can you help me write some SQL to do this analysis? And it'll just write the SQL for you, and then you run it. That would be another option. Okay. So we've talked a bunch about relabeling data and analyzing or summarizing data. And there's tons of directions you can take that. I would say be careful, make sure that you check its work, ask it to check its work, or maybe write code to like have it write you the code and then you run the code. That's another option. Now, the next use case that I want to show is how do we, and I'm going to start a new chat for this. I often have a problem of I need to create dummy data for teaching, but it's not limited to teaching. If you are running, like if you're doing software demos, for example, and you want fake data to do your software demos for the product you sell, or you want fake data because you're running, like you have a new software thing that you're implementing as a company, like a new IT system, and you have to test it before you send it live out to the world or whatever. There's a lot of reasons you might want dummy data. We can ask it to create dummy data. So I'm going to tell it I need to make up some data for an Excel class I'm teaching. I want employee data, like a list of employees. I want name, salary, team, location. It's a US-based tech company, let's assume. I want 100 rows. Great. So let's see what it does. It's actually generally very good at this kind of work. So we'll just create a bunch of fake data. Let's see how it does. In the PDF, the PowerPoint that we'll send you guys, we'll actually send you the PowerPoint version. There's GIFs of everything we did here. So like you can click it and see like what it generally should look like. So you can use it to create dummy data. There's some questions about like what's best for what. So Claude, I was starting to talk about this. Claude, you can't upload Excel, but it's way better than ChatGPT, in my opinion, about reading through PDFs and summarizing them. So we'll see that in a second. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. And then what I might ask it to do is like, let's separate first name and last name and city and state and so on. So one of the things I would emphasize is experiment. It's a conversation. It's a continuous iteration process. You'll get a lot better fast if you just try it. And continue to ask for what you want. Just react to what it gives you. And so then I could say, yes, let's please put this in Excel and open the Excel file, and that's what we would have. So making up dummy data tends to be pretty good at. Okay, so what's next? The next thing is analyzing or summarizing financial information. So let's say that I have a model and let's say I've PDF'd my key model pages. Maybe this is a model somebody else, like some investment banker sent me. Again, we're not dumping sensitive data into ChatGPT, but imagining a future world with enterprise. Or maybe this is my own model and I'm writing like a summary email to the team. Like that's possible to just summarize what I assumed in the model. So this is uploading a PDF. Uploading a PDF to the advanced data analysis. So this is one option. My experience is that Claude is going to be better at this, which I'll show in a second, but it'll do an okay job. This is correct, by the way. The model does go from 21 to 34.5 of EBITDA. Our revenue growth is 7%. COGS is 40% of sales. Like everything it's saying is accurate. Now, it's not to say you shouldn't check it, but that summary is correct. So it just read through a model PDF, which was like income statement, balance sheet, cash flow, returns, and so on. And it just summarized the key points. Now, there's lots of ways to do this summary. We could see if, so Claude is a totally different tool. It's by Anthropic, which is a competitor to OpenAI. It's actually some ex-OpenAI people that started it. It's a company that Google just invested a lot in. And in general, I find like it's my go-to for PDF summaries. I actually didn't even ask it to summarize it. It just did that. So I think, and this is the free version of Claude, by the way, that it is just for Claude, you get all this PDF summarizing out of the box in the free version. It just rate limits you. You can't ask it for too many things in an hour or a day or whatever. So here's another summary. And again, we could ask it to like tell us more, or, you know, what do you think about these assumptions? It's a services company, let's say. And then you can just, it's like pretty wild, I think. It's like talking to an associate or maybe a VP. One of the exercises people do is come up with public comparable companies. Here's lots of ideas. I don't know about you guys, but I look at this, I'm like, this is crazy. you get used to it like pretty fast, but it's still like you have to remind yourself it's crazy. The one other thing I would say, besides you could upload the PDF to the advanced data analysis or to Claude, another thing to experiment with sometimes, and if you want to use a different model, you have to do a new chat, is I could come here to this and say, let's go to the default. So with the default model, you can upload pictures, which you can't do in the advanced data analysis. So I could say, let's look at a income statement picture. This is just an image, and ask it to summarize that. Or here it's trying to put it in Excel file. I don't actually want that. So although this may be a useful use case. And let's just see if it can summarize it. So I find, and some of the summaries are verbose. So you might say, can you make a succinct summary for me to put in an email? I don't need to know every last thing, that kind of stuff. But at a minimum, for just like not wasting all your time writing stuff down that is like there, it can just write it for you. One of the things that I will like, you could totally do today out of the gates, because it's not proprietary anyways, take any public company's financial statements and ask it to analyze them. So like Apple came out with earnings yesterday. This is cruising along, summarizing. It looks generally correct. I could say, will you please summarize? These are Apple's financial statements that they published, I think 1 or 2 days ago. And let's just see if we can get it to summarize those. And then you could ask it like, how would I voice this over in a conversation, you know? So if it's earnings season and you're trying to absorb a lot of information all at once, you could PDF or grab the PDFs and give it to Claude and get some pretty quick summaries. And then you can, of course, converse with it. There's information here about different products. So like you could say any product level trends to note. And all of this stuff, you should look back at the original data and make sure what it's saying seems to make sense. But I tested a lot of this earlier and generally was doing a good job. My experience translating PDFs to Excel, which I have done through ChatGPT advanced analysis, because you can't get it into Excel here, is that it sometimes works and that you have to coax it quite a bit. So like it will get a little bit confused about columns and stuff. And like, if you are willing to sit there and coax it, you can probably get it to do it, but it takes a little bit of work. So I would say I find myself doing it sometimes, especially for, but it will also sometimes just say, sorry, I can't read that PDF, or it's not in a format I can deal with, or whatever. It'll throw up on it sometimes, or it'll do it, but not quite what you wanted for that table. So it's a little bit of trial and error. But if you're struggling with that with the PDF, you could always take an image of it, put it in what we saw before the default with an image, and see if it'll put that in Excel, which is also, it may succeed. Okay. So what next? So we can summarize stuff. We can analyze financials. We could have it help us prepare for investment banking interviews. So we could say, and this one actually works fine on the default and on the advanced analysis. So let's say classic interview question, and we have $30 of depreciation, 30% tax rate. How do we walk through 3 statements? It will walk you through it. Sometimes it struggles to render. It's actually trying to render this in more of like a latex kind of way, and it just struggles, but it's fine. We can still read it. So there you go. Now, one of the actually pretty cool things that a lot of people are not aware of exists is now on your phone, not on your computer. ChatGPT Plus has audio. So let's say you're preparing for an interview and you want to literally go through this out loud. You could click the audio and say, can we practice some investment banking accounting questions? And it will ask you a question and you can say an answer and it will tell you what to say better. All live, all on your phone. It's like insane. You also can upload we sort of saw it with the image of the model, but you can upload pictures. And so like if you have your phone out, this is more in like the fun use cases, but like you can take a picture of whatever, take a picture of like the plants that are dying in my garden and say, what are these? What am I supposed to do? And it will just tell you because it can ingest any image as well. So that is, it's pretty good. So like if there's stuff you run into a question on, like let's say you're not prepping for interviews, but you're like, wait, how do I wire up pick interest again in my model? It will remind you. It'll say, here's the accounting, here's how you wire it up, and so on. There is the you can browse the web. So again, you'd have to go to new chat to get to a new model. You can say browse with Bing. So you could say, could you summarize this? It will summarize data for you. It will not scrape the web for you. So I think not because it can't, it's just because it doesn't, because it's a gray area. So you can't be like, hey, go to this conference website and give me all the companies. I'm sure it like theoretically could do that, but it won't do that. But you could say, please like help me. Not that you should just go doing lots of web scraping that you shouldn't do, but you could just say, can you help me write the code to do that? Then you could run the code and do whatever you want. The code writing should be in advanced data analysis. Okay. All right. So this is basically, I gave it a website that was an industry report on recent software, like trends and software valuation for SaaS companies. And it's gone ahead and summarized this. And there is obviously a question of, is it accurately summarizing things? Go back and check, like just like you would if an analyst on your team wrote a summary, like it could be wrong. So what it's not yet consistently good at that we've experimented with a bunch, building a model from scratch. So if I said, hey, I want a DCF model with the following assumptions, it will do it, but it doesn't get it right 100% of the time, and sometimes in frustrating ways. And you do need to have enough knowledge to check what it's done. So if I'm like, I want a DCF model and it's 100 million of revenue growing X% a year, these like income statement assumptions and so on, I find it does a good job on the income statement, but as it gets into some of the free cash flow stuff or present value of that, like it'll make mistakes. And you're like, you can get it, you can make it better by saying, are you sure? Please check your work. That doesn't look right. But if you don't have the knowledge to know what does look right, then that might be not great. If you're checking your work, so I do think it still can be helpful for checking your work. But again, this is just, what does it not consistently do? If you give it some model and you're like, hey, my balance sheet doesn't balance, it will be able to go through and say, hey, your balance sheet doesn't balance. Your assets should equal your liabilities plus equity. Here's where it's not balancing. But if I'm like, why doesn't it balance? I find that it's not that good at telling me why. Yeah, I'm sure it will evolve. And then the converting tables from PDF to Excel was a question earlier. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you have to coax it quite a bit. So it just depends a little bit. And then let's go to the next page. So couple pro tips we've kind of talked about. A huge thing here is just when do you use what tool? When do you flip to the default model and kind of give it an image? When do you, when you're wanting to, I would say in general, instinct should be you're uploading or downloading Excel, you have to use advanced data analysis as of this time, or get access to Microsoft Copilot, which we haven't talked about here. We'll do a future session on that. If you're going to write code, if you want it to write code for you, which is very good at, you can do that in advanced data analysis. And the flow should be, hey, can you write me some code to do this? And then try running it. And then if it's, or read through it, whatever, and then run it. If it's not working, paste your error message back in there. And then it'll be like, oh, I see this is going wrong. You should do this. Replit is a very easy tool to run codes. Like even if you're not a person who has any computer science background, Replit like lets you run stuff in the browser. It takes like 2 seconds to set up, and between ChatGPT and like when I started using Replit, I was like, I asked ChatGPT, how do I use it? And it was like, click here, do that. So it will like teach you how to use software tools if you start using them. Yeah. Summarizing financial analysis, I would say Claude is a little better than ChatGPT for summarizing PDFs and so on, but advanced data analysis can do it as well. Images you could drop into ChatGPT default. Always try to keep like, if you could, the cleaner the file you give it, I think the faster you'll get to your end result. Always ask it to check its work. Make sure you check its work, you check totals and so on, sanity check the work. And then just think of prompting as an iterative experience. If you're going to do the same thing over and over again, I'd probably save that in a doc so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and then continue to experiment with all this stuff. Let's go to the next page. So other fun use cases, you can create images. You just click GPT-4 and click the DALL-E 3. This image on the right was done by DALL-E 3 this, a little while ago. And then I love it for using any software tool. I always get stuck in stuff like Canva. I'm like, where do I click? It makes me insane. I feel old and incapable, but I just ask ChatGPT now and it's like, click here, do this, whatever. And so, and you can even like screenshot something and say, I'm not sure what I should do. And it will figure it out most of the time. Because it has all of the docs and all the knowledge on that, at least up to a certain point, up to January 2022. In terms of code, it can write SQL queries, it can write Python, it can write HTML, really whatever you want. Replit is an easy place to dump some of that stuff to run it. And Replit actually has its own AI embedded. I have historically used ChatGPT, but it also has an AI tool, I think probably calling OpenAI, but I'm not sure. And then you can, like now, anything that would be long and take me time to read that's not proprietary, I drop in for a summary before I start reading it. Then I spend my time reading it, if relevant. You can mock interview. You can take pictures and ask questions. I take a picture of my fridge and my pantry, and I'm like, what should I have for lunch? And it'll give me like 5 fun ideas that I wouldn't have thought of. So that's the basics. So we'll stop the slides there. And that's the end of the general teaching piece. And then we'll definitely do more of these series where we're geared around like practically just showing stuff in some of these tools. Feedback welcome, requests welcome for what you want to experiment with. Send us notes, like we're trying to learn. And so we appreciate all the learning you guys are sharing as well. Thank you guys for joining.